Greetings, APUSH scholars, for our review on Unit 3, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, looking at the review sheet from top to bottom concerning the Articles of Confederation, successes and problems, and how the Constitution fixed the problems. Well, first of all, the Articles of Confederation government successfully prosecuted the war to its end and signed the Treaty of Paris of 1783, where we won the Revolutionary War. All the land to the Mississippi, between the Mississippi and the Appalachians, was given to the new United States government as part of the peace terms, and fishing rights were given off the Canadian coast. And the successes, in 1785, you have the Land Ordinance, which sets up townships in the West. It's an orderly, coherent way to distribute land. Every 16th section of a township, which is 6 miles by 6 miles, was reserved for education. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 provided a mechanism for self-government. You get 5,000 settlers, and you can ask Congress to allow you to govern yourselves, and you come up with a state constitution and 60,000 people, and you can come in as a free and independent and equal state into the United States. So the Land Ordinance, the Northwest Ordinance, which also, by the way, banned slavery above the Ohio River, and the peace treaty, these are the successes. Now, the Articles of Confederation, we don't have them anymore because of their glaring problems. One of them being no separate chief executive. And one of the solutions here is there is an independent president, independent of the other branches, set up by the Constitution in 1788. There are no national courts, and this is going to be remedied once Washington is president. He'll pass the Judicial Act of 1789, which sets up district courts, appeals courts, and a Supreme Court. The Articles of Confederation could not tax or could not enforce a tax quota put on the states, and you see the weakness here in Shays' Rebellion. These farmers in western Massachusetts rise up against what they see as an unjust government, and the contrast here is under the new Constitution. Washington actually leads an army into western Pennsylvania to collect the whiskey tax, which the whiskey rebels have been not paying, and they've been harassing tax collectors. The Articles of Confederation government could not effectively negotiate with other countries, whereas under Washington, Jay's Treaty gets the Brits out of the western forts in what would be our land at this point. Pinckney's Treaty opens up New Orleans for the right of deposit, and the Treaty of Greenville gets the white settlers, at least, to Ohio, and it sees the defeat of the Indians there. The debt, the sort of funny money that's not worth a continental dollar, is replaced by solid credit with Hamilton's report on public credit, leading to a paydown of not just the national debt but also the state debts under the Assumption Bill. So these are some problems here. Basically no president, no national courts, trade wars between states, this Congress can't tax, not being able to negotiate effectively with other countries, and a growing debt and inability to pay it down. Compromises at the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention. The two big things here are representation, which is solved by having a bicameral legislature with a House based upon population, and a Senate with equal votes, 2 senators per state. Argument over slavery. Do the slaves count for purposes of representation on the House? And the compromise is the 3/5 clause, which says that slaves are 3/5 the value of a white person for purposes of representation. The importance of Shays' Rebellion and its contrast with the later Whiskey Rebellion. Remember, Shays' Rebellion is when the Boston government levies this tax, at which many of the farmers feel is oppressive. They can't pay it. Their land is being confiscated. And many of these farmers, in particular Daniel Shea, he is a former sort of right-hand, officer who fought with Washington through the war, and they're coming back after fighting a war against unjust taxation, that great hardship. Many of them hadn't been paid, basically haven't been paid, and they suffered through this arduous war, and now they're having their land taken by the government that they fought to defend. So the Shays Rebellion are these rebels which march on the local courthouses and take them over, and it sort of shows anarchy. Whereas the Whiskey Rebellion is another anti-tax rebellion in western Pennsylvania. The Congress has launched a bunch of excise taxes, including a tax on whiskey, and the whiskey rebels aren't going to pay it. And Washington marches an army out to suppress the rebels. A bunch are arrested and tried and thrown in jail, and basically this rebellion just peters out. But it shows that the government has the power to levy a tax and to collect it. The differences between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, remember the Federalists wanted order, they wanted economic stability, they wanted defense of American interests against Indians and the British and the Spanish who were blocking the Mississippi. The Anti-Federalists feared a strong, oppressive government would replace the British government that they just fought to get rid of. Some differences between the Federalists and the I'm repeating myself, sorry, differences between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. A lot of times the Democratic Republicans are just shortened to the Republicans. The Federalists, their sort of ideological leader is Hamilton, and the Republicans, their ideological leader is Jefferson. And what you have here is the Federalists want a strong central government. They believed in loose construction of the Constitution, and they believe in this. They support this idea of the elastic clause. The government can do what is necessary and proper. They're pro-business. They're pro-Britain because Britain represents order and our number one trading partner. The Republicans, on the other hand, don't want a strong central government. They want strong states and a very limited, constricted government, and they believed in strict construction. That means limited interpretation of the Constitution. If the Constitution does not say you can do it, you can't do it. None of this elastic clause business. They tended to be pro-farmer instead of pro-business, and they tended to be pro-France. They saw the French revolutionaries as carrying on the torch of liberation of people against despotism and tyranny in the form of a monarch. Washington, how he helped strengthen the government. Well, I'm going to answer this with the next point on the review sheet, Hamilton's three-part economic plan and why he did these three things. And then more on Washington, but Hamilton is working for Washington. He's the Secretary of Treasury, and what he's going to do is stabilize the economy in several different ways. Hamilton's report on public credit says we need to pay down the debt. We need to pay what we owe. We need to make our government credible economically. And the Assumption Bill both says we will pay the federal debt and we'll pay the state debts. And remember, there's that compromise here. The southern states had paid their debts, so we moved the capital from New York down to the District of Columbia, which is sort of carved out of swampland between Maryland and Virginia. But one of the things here is remember this problem of the Articles of Confederation government is they're not paying their debts. Our money is basically bogus. A second thing here is, and it's part of this report on public credit, is creating a national bank, a bank that will encourage commercial activity. And a third thing is the report on manufacture, which advocates a tariff, and the tariff is going to be set up as a protective tariff to protect us from competition with British goods, to support American industry. So Washington, under him you have this three-part financial plan: pay our debts, set up a national bank, and set up a tariff. You also have under Washington the passage of the Bill of Rights, which is a huge thing in bolstering the rights of the people against this new government, which has just been created. You have the defeat of the Whiskey Rebellion, which shows the strength of the government. You have these three treaties: the Treaty of San Lorenzo, also called Pinckney's Treaty, which gives us the right to drop our stuff off in Spanish-held New Orleans. And yeah, keep in mind here, New Orleans at this time is controlled by Spain. Later, we're going to buy it from from Napoleon and the French, but that's a different story. So you have the Treaty of San Lorenzo, you have the Jay's Treaty, where the Brits get out of their forts in the west, and then you have the Treaty of Greenville, where the Indians basically surrender control of Ohio. And Washington also, really in a very savvy way, keeps us out of foreign entanglements. Remember his farewell address, but the proclamation of neutrality keeps us from basically honoring our deal with the French when they're fighting the Brits. But Washington keeps us out of harm's way. And finally, he steps down after 2 terms, setting this precedent that he is just a citizen like the rest of Americans. Jumping down to Washington's farewell address, the 2 parts here are stay out of entanglements, stay out of alliances, stay out of foreign conflicts, be friends to all, enemies of none. And secondly, he warned against faction. What he means here is political parties. We're all Americans. We shouldn't be arguing and hating each other and all that. Of course, the 2 leaders of the factions are under his tent. They are Jefferson with the Republicans and the Federalists led by Hamilton. Successes of the Federalists before their demise as a party. After Adams, we don't have any more Federalist presidents, but you end up with economic stability. You end up with a Bill of Rights. The country is growing. The country is spreading west. The country is prospering, and you have a peaceful transition. What's not to like about the Federalists, right? Washington's treaties, just went over them. Jay's, Brits get out of the forts in the west. Pinckney's treaty, also called San Lorenzo, opens up the right of deposit in New Orleans. Greenville, Ohio, is surrendered by the Indians. Proclamation of neutrality is what it says. The XYZ affair, this is under John Adams. He sends some diplomats to France. Remember, there's this quasi-naval war from 1798 to 2000, or to 2000, where did I get that from? 1798 to 1800. And what's going on here is, we're trading with both sides, the French and the Brits, who are at war basically from just about 1799 to 1815. It's a long-running war between France and the Brits. And the French are grabbing our ships. They're grabbing our ships, grabbing our cargo. Hundreds of ships are being grabbed, and we're almost at war with France. And some diplomats are sent to talk to Foreign Minister Talleyrand, and his representatives are demanding basically a bribe. And our guys come home without ever really negotiating. And this is all supposed to be, sort of kept under wraps. They're given sort of code names here, X, Y, and Z. And the country under the Federalists is just ready for war, and we're building our military up. And we don't go to war, though. And that's one of the things that's going to hurt John Adams' presidency. One of the reasons why he's probably not elected in 1800. Remember, Jefferson does follow him. Alien and Sedition Acts, again, this is under Adams. The Alien Act allows him to throw out aliens who are suspected of revolutionary sympathies with France. You have the Sedition Act, which basically punishes criticism of the U.S. government. Remember, sedition is disloyalty, and the First Amendment specifically gives us the right to be disloyal in the sense of disagreeing and speaking out against the government. But not, Jefferson will get rid of the Sedition and Alien Acts, but not until several dozen journalists and newspaper editors who are Republicans are thrown in jail. And the reason for this is this fear of French revolutionary thought coming to America. And sort of think that the AP is not doing the synthesis anymore, but they used to ask you, what's this like elsewhere in American history? And you might sort of think a fear of communism would be one thing in the 20th century. Also, I don't have this on the review sheet. Be familiar with the Naturalization Act. Increase the time to become a U.S. citizen from 5 years to 14 years. And again, this is all aimed at keeping French revolutionary thought and immigrants out, and to punish those who were sympathetic to them. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions by Jefferson and Madison basically are challenges to the federal government, saying these 2 states will not obey the Alien and Sedition and Naturalization Acts. And of course, this becomes a moot issue once Jefferson comes into power in 1800. Again, another reason why Adams probably lost this election is his violation of the First Amendment. All these acts are repealed by Jefferson. The Embargo Act, 1807, to keep us out of this continuing raging war between France and Great Britain, who are grabbing our ships and our sailors and cargoes. Jefferson bans all foreign trade. I mean, all foreign trade with everyone. And the plan here is to keep us out of these foreign entanglements. And this causes a huge economic tailspin on the East Coast. Last piece of the review sheet here, Marbury versus Madison, the significant, and the president this happens under. The president would be Thomas Jefferson. And the significance here, the short story is this sets up, the Supreme Court takes the right of judicial review. And this is in many ways implied in the Constitution, and you have certainly a tradition of independent courts at this time in Great Britain, but this is something that's not specifically in the Constitution, this idea that the Supreme Court can overturn really any laws. And there's more detail to this. You should be familiar. The 1789 Judiciary Act, which set up the court system, had this little clause in it which gave the Supreme Court what's called the writ of mandamus, and it was the right to order government officials in the executive branch to do their business, to do what they're supposed to be doing. It's a right to boss the executive branch around. And what's happening here is Marbury is a Federalist judge. He's been given an appointment under the 1801 Judiciary Act, which is trying to pack the courts with all of these Federalist judges. Remember, in the 1800 election, Jefferson wins. The Federalists have lost the presidency, they've lost the House, they've lost the Senate, and the Federalists are trying to hang on to the courts. And Marbury's one of these guys who's gotten a job, but he's not gotten the commission. He's not gotten the piece of paper. That's sitting on a desk in the Secretary of State's office, who is Mr. Madison, who's working for Mr. Jefferson. So you get this change in government, and Marbury wants his job, and he's not getting it. He's not getting the commission. So he goes up to the Supreme Court, and he's asking for them to tell Jefferson / Madison to give him his job. And the Supreme Court, which is ruled by 100% Federalists at this time, is going to basically say no to Mr. Marbury. He is going to be sacrificed. This tiny little Federalist is going to be sacrificed on the altar of, hey, we are now taking this right of judicial review. We've got this bigger power that we can use, not this little power of writ of mandamus. And the writ of mandamus is struck down. The principle here is that Mr. Marbury, he needs to go through the lower courts. He needs to go sort of up the chain here. He can't just barge into the Supreme Court and kind of yank their chain and tell them what to do. So a little bit more information than you might need on Marbury versus Madison, but remember the AP, when they score you, they rank you, and they rank you according to what you know. So if you can sort of explain what's going on here, that is all really good. So anyhow, study hard, study smart, study early. Look over the review sheet. If it's on the review sheet, it's going to be on the test. Signing out.